All right. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed that new beginning bit there. Let's go ahead and get into this video. We're not even going to waste that much time. Let's go ahead and just share.
Conservatives warned about before the election. We said very emphatically that bad things would happen if Biden was elected. Bad things would happen if the Democrats maintained a grip on both houses of Congress.
Bad things. What do you mean by bad things? I'm not going to watch. Apparently, he has like some hour-long video where he describes how Biden is somehow a fascist. I'm just like, really? Okay, bro.
That what we would see is not merely an expansion of the centralized state, not just economic confiscation, higher tax rates, more regulation, a
centralized state. And what did conservatives do about that? Could you answer me that question, Dinesh? What did these conservatives do about it? I would guess nothing, and that all they did was use this to fearmonger so that they could get money.
Kind of stifling of the economy. But we would see encroachment into civil liberties, greater and greater threats to basic rights, free speech, freedom of religion, now even due process. We would also begin to see an attack on our basic institutions, an effort.
Does he explain any of these things? No, he doesn't.
To weaken institutions that provide any kind of resistance to the state and coordinate the other institutions of the state, of society, the media.
See, everybody knows is that Dinesh D'Souza wrote about segregation and wrote about, how black folks are evil, this and that. But yet, he's going to say that fascism is a different thing now because he's learned to play the game.
Academia, Hollywood, but even an effort to whip the corporate sector into line, sports teams into line. The aggression of the left seems to know no bounds. You think they would be content with saying, well, listen, we got the universities, we got Hollywood. What do we care about the NFL or the skating team? But they do care. They want to establish this harmony across the whole society. Now, the Nazis had a term for this, Gleichschaltung, coordination. And we see, I think, in the left today, some strong hints of not Nazism, but fascism.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so he's being somewhat. So he's trying to show that there is a difference here. Oh my goodness, this guy. Okay, go ahead.
And yet that term is so highly contested. We've got this group, Antifa, anti-fascists, so they're branding themselves as fighting fascism. And yet you have to look around there. Where are the fascists that they are fighting? So what do these terms even mean?
Well, the thing is that they're feds. That's the whole thing. But of course, you don't seem to realize that. But okay, go ahead.
What is fascism? Now, when I get into this with various pundits on social media, you have people like the historian Kevin Cruz, Dinesh, you don't understand fascism at all. Well, this is a guy who's written a book about white flight in Atlanta, busing patterns in Atlanta. What does he know about fascism? Not a lot. And so I think...
Come on. You're going to... Okay, hold on. So explaining white flight is definitely an aspect for a lot of American Wignats. Let's just say Wignats because you don't need the denoter. Yeah. Wignats are not the same thing across the world. But anyway, the thing is that you think that there wasn't a white flight when when the Germans were forced to leave, Prussia or East Prussia, and settled back in Germany, or the Volga Germans. That was white flight too. So I mean, that could be an aspect of fascism, But I'm doing such an awful job about talking about this. But holy moly. Go ahead.
Figured, why not bring on the podcast someone who is a preeminent authority on fascism, and also, as it happens, a preeminent authority on the Spanish Civil War. That's the second issue that's really important today. Is the dividedness of America going to be healed, or is it going to continue? Is it going to get worse?
It's going to get worse. We all know it's going to get worse.
Much worse. Is the radicalization of the left going to lead to a radicalization on the right? Are both sides going to become increasingly intemperate, violent? Are both sides going to try to do to each other the same sorts of things that they shut the other side down, shut them up, contract or compress their civil liberties? Now, Professor Stanley Payne.
The thing is that it's funny that he has understood that there's a difference between what National Socialism was, or Nazism, versus fascism. But he's like, he's like I said, a lot of the time, this is what conservatives do. They speak in generalities. They don't give any specificity at all. They simply say, conservatives have been talking about this forever. What do conservatives do about it? You know, he doesn't want to answer those types of questions, and will say stuff like, well, actually, Biden's the real fascist, and you just look like an idiot. Instead, he's going to talk about the Spanish Civil War, and I bet he's not going to say anything about Catholicism specifically. But yeah, go ahead.
Is now retired. He's the emeritus professor of history at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, where he taught from 1968 till he retired in 2005.
Don't care.
He's written a number of really important books. I have one right here that I brought with me. It's called A History of Fascism, 1914 to 9. Just one of several books on fascism. And he's written a whole bunch of books on the Spanish Civil War. So here's a guy who really knows what he's talking about, who has sort of, you may say, lived through it, seen it up close.
Really?
And has had a career.
You mean he lived in Spain in the 1930s? I don't think he did.
Writing about these things in a way that has brought him worldwide recognition. So I'm delighted to invite Stanley Payne to come on this podcast and speak for the whole hour, in which we get into some of the basic...
You're going to make me watch the whole podcast. All right, okay. Let's just go ahead and skip to the bullshit. All right. You're going to make me listen to the whole thing, huh? All right, I'll listen to it then. Fine, I'll give in.
We see growing trends of centralization, suppression.
I like the grifting, though. I'll give him that. I like the grifting behind him. I like the fact that it's like, take a look at all my movies that I made, which are all crapola. But yeah.
Censorship in America today. Are we devolving towards some kind of tyranny, fascism, civil war? In this special episode,
okay, those are three completely different things. All right. I mean, maybe you can make a link between tyranny and fascism. All right, I'll give you that. But the thing is, though, it's amazing to me how he'll use that word fascism. It's like the left will use, so-called, anarchists and so-called Marxist-Leninists will use fascism as well. So what are you referring to? And the last part being civil war would lead to some sort of balkanization, especially in this country. But yeah, let's go ahead and listen to these old boomers trying to talk their shit. Go ahead. Well, he's not even a boomer. He's probably older than that, but let's go ahead and see.
Bring on one of the world's leading authorities on fascism, Professor Stanley Payne, to discuss these issues, not just historically, but also apply them to America today. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
No, I'm not going to sit here and listen to your bullshit. Okay, let's get to it.
Hollywood, what do we care about the NFL or the skating team? But they do care. They want to establish this harmony across the whole society.
No, they don't want to establish harmony across society. The thing is that if you really look at the Nazi regime, they didn't even want to have harmony throughout society. They fought against each other all the time. There was an internal struggle immensely between the Waffen-SS and the army, and just the whole of the SS versus the rest of, the normal police forces. I remember listening to that podcast last night. The SS was going to take over everything. If everything had dragged on the way that it was, SS was going to take over everything. So this is just fei hua, in my opinion. But go ahead.
Now, the Nazis had a term for this, Gleichschaltung, coordination. And we see, I think, in the left today, some strong hints of not Nazism, but fascism. Fascism.
Oh my goodness. So he's trying to sound more big brain by trying to understand the difference between Nazism versus fascism. This is something that, once again, even so-called modern day LARPy fascists try to do today. We're different from those National Socialists. We're not National Socialists. We're fascists. There's a difference. We like Mussolini. We don't like Hitler. And all this sort of cope. I mean, it's just ridiculous. No, man, you're gonna be seen as the same people. It doesn't matter what sort of, the differences are meaningless to most people.
And yet that term is so highly contested. We've got this group, Antifa, anti-fascists, so they're branding themselves as fighting fascism.
Oh, yes, Antifa are the real fascists. Mm-hmm. No, they're just LARPers.
And yet you have to look around there. Where are the fascists that they are fighting? So what do these terms...
Well, I hate to sit here and defend Antifa, but you could say the Proud Boys. You could say, Patriot Prayer. You could say the police. That's what they would tell you in response to that. Or they would bring up, whatever was left of the National Socialist movement, although it doesn't exist, as I've said before. A lot of other examples, but yeah.
Even mean? What is fascism? Now, when I get into this with various pundits on social media, you have people like the historian Kevin Cruz, Dinesh, you don't understand fascism at all. Well, this is a guy who's written a book about white flight in Atlanta, busing patterns in Atlanta. What does he know about fascism?
I've already explained this. All right.
A lot. And so I figured, why not bring on the podcast someone who is a preeminent...
Let's go ahead and skip to the end
leading.
Here. I'm sorry for doing that. I thought there was something interesting, but yeah.
I think it's going to be a great show. I'm looking forward to it. When we come back, I'll be joined by Professor Stanley Payne, an authority on civil war and an authority on fascism.
Authority, huh? All right.
Welcome.
How much did they give this guy? How much money did they give this old man?
Professor Stanley Payne to the podcast. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. You have been you have devoted your career to studying both the topic of fascism.
Let's take a look at this Stanley G. Payne before we go any further. Let's go ahead and see if we can't skewer this up here. Stanley G. Payne. Okay, here we go. Let's take a look at his credentials. We're going to look at Wikipedia. We're going to be cringe and say that. Okay, Professor Emeritus. Okay. Typological description of fascism. Specialist in the Spanish fascist movement, and has also produced comparative analyses of Western European fascism. He asserts that there are some specific ways in which National Socialism paralleled Russian communism. This is something that, once again, I'm sure if I actually read the books that are on my shelf, but people like Leo Strauss, another well-known conservative at the time, wrote about this as well, that National Socialism and Russian communism or Soviet communism was the same thing because they were both transformative for different ways, but they were both transformative societies and all that sort of thing. Okay. Books were published in Spanish. Spanish Republican. Publishing company set up by Spanish Republicans. Ooh. Okay. Payne uses lengthy, itemized lists of characteristics to identify fascism, including the creation of an authoritarian state, a regulated state, integrated economic sector. Okay. Fascist symbolism, anti-liberalism, anti-communism, and anti-conservatism. Okay. I don't really get that. The idea of anti-conservatism, I mean, like I say, conservatism is not just, and maybe this is cope by me saying this, but it's like you can be socially conservative and then still want socialism as well, in some form. People would talk about Stalin, where it's like, yeah, he obviously didn't like homosexuality, a degenerate, when that British guy wrote to Stalin saying, "You shouldn't, persecute homosexuals and whatnot." And then pretty soon afterwards, that same guy, this gay dude, left the Marxist movement and became a journalist and wrote about how bad communism was and all that. But yeah. Soviet Union and Communism, which analyzed Joseph Stalin and Stalin's government intervention in Spain. He also wrote about the Franco regime, Spanish Civil War, and the history of fascism, 1914-1945. Okay, yeah. All right, let's hear what this goober has to say. So this is, okay, so it's interesting that Dinesh D'Souza talks to someone for a publishing company that was set up by Spanish Republican exiles in Paris, France, forbidden in Spain by the Francoist regime. So once again, I mean, so let's look at this. Let's go ahead and translate it because I'm no habla español. Yeah, okay. Founded in 1961, 5 Spanish refugees from Civil War set out to confront the Franco regime, publishing books. Let's see what we've got here. So, Iberian Brown against censorship. Anti-Franco voice. Interesting. All right. Well, there you go. I was looking for some other information, but it sounds like, fairly on the up and up. All right.
And the Spanish Civil War. Let me start by asking, how did you develop an interest in these topics?
By serendipity, that is, I simply began in a normal way as an American graduate student, deciding to specialize in Spanish history because at that time in the mid-20th century, it simply was not being studied in the United States. And then I had to come up with a dissertation topic.
I hope I don't get that old. I'm just saying, I'm sorry.
For the PhD, and my advisor suggested the figure of José Antonio Primo de Rivera, the founder and leader of the Spanish Fascist Party.
Phalange Party. Phalanx is a whole different thing than the fascists. And also, Primo de Primavera was assassinated.
And so I developed that into a dissertation and a book, which was quite successful. And rather grandiosely, I subtitled it,
"Oh, wow.
History of Spanish Fascism."
See, look at this. You can tell you could already tell this is an old man desk. Okay. So he's got, I can't tell how old that damn thing is, but that's pretty old. That's probably from like 1970s, probably. Yeah, this guy, you can tell that those of y'all who have been to college, you could already tell looking at this guy that this guy was definitely in the history department. You could already tell. He's got the jacket. He's got the very sparse desk, very sparse background. I'm telling you, this is very, very typical of a typical history professor in college. I'm just telling you that right now. The couple of history classes I had to take in college, this is pretty much what it's like when you go to their office. Very sparse, very, very boring, and very dry.
Fascism, though I thought I could identify the movement as a fascist type movement. But on the other hand, I knew very little about fascism, as almost anyone knew very little about fascism in general in those days.
Yeah.
And this developed an interest in the broader phenomenon, which I worked on for a period of 20 years before I finally wrote my first book about fascism itself, because the phenomenon was bewildering at that point in history. Probably still is.
Let me ask you about fascism, where it's a word that continues, as you know, to be, I think, quite promiscuously bandied about. You make a remarkable statement early on. This is from your book, A History of Fascism. You say the nucleus that eventually founded fascism in Italy, and of course, fascism really began as a national phenomenon in Italy. It came to Germany only much later, a decade later. The nucleus that eventually founded fascism in Italy, you say, did not stem from the right-wing nationalists, but from a transformation on the part of the revolutionary left. Now, this may come as a surprise to people that fascism emerges in Italy from the left, that Mussolini...
Okay. let's get this clear. All right. So people like Giovanni Gentile, the kind of the head ideologist. I'm going to use that word loosely, but the ideology guy, Giovanni Gentile, and Gramsci were taught under the same liberal teacher or the same liberal professor in college. You can look that up fairly easily. So there's really not that much there. I mean, people will refer to Mussolini, but the thing is that, yeah, Mussolini for a time was a socialist, but then he went to the First World War and he found that he liked war, much the same way as other folks did. But, like I say, this is a very gray area. But yeah, let's go ahead and hear this explanation.
Mussolini, the leading figure of Italian fascism, came out of the Marxist tradition. So what happened on the left that gave birth to this kind of new hybrid called fascism?
Well, it was a phenomenon of World War I, process of nationalization of a minority of the revolutionary left in Italy, particularly the sector that call themselves revolutionary syndicalists, that is, trade unionists or oriented toward trade unionism of a revolutionary sort. And revolutionary syndicalism morphed into what they called national syndicalism. And that became probably the main theoretical and organizational basis of fascism in the very first moments.
Okay. I'm going to wait to see if he mentions, people like, oh my goodness, I'm going to look at my shelf here because I know I have that book on my shelf somewhere. It's going to bug the hell out of me now. I know it's a French guy. I know it's a French. I can't think of his name. Mon Dieu. Oh man. See, I'm worse than this guy in terms of memory. I'm talking about people like, oh man, it's gonna bug me. Let me see if I can, give me a moment here. I know this is a recording, but just give me just a moment, please. That's it. Took me just a moment. George Sorel. That's who I was thinking of. Is he going to talk about George Sorel and syndicalism?
Would it be fair to say that part of what inspired Mussolini was the desire to fuse the concept of nationalism or attachment to your country with classic Marxian socialism? And so putting the two together, you get
Marxian socialism. That's funny. Especially when the Axis the Axis started out as the anti-Comintern. They were completely against Marxism. I would love to see if they actually mention people like Gramsci and whatnot, but they're not going to. Like I say, they're not going to mention that. They're going to continue to have this idea of, well, actually, Nazis are left wing, and it's just it's such a tentative string. Okay, yeah, I'll surrender a point and say, yeah, Mussolini did come from a socialist background. But what sort of connection do you have that with Hitler? And and even before that, what was the National Workers' Party? What became the NSDAP? But what started out as a more of a right-wing workers' movement. And I know people are going to say that's an oxymoron, but I'm just saying in general.
National Socialism. Now, I don't believe Mussolini liked the term National Socialism because it became associated later, of course, with Hitler. But wasn't it a fact that Mussolini was, in a sense, marrying nationalism and socialism to create this new thing that was called fascism?
No, there's a word called corporatism, which they used, which had some similarities. But yes, syndicalism. Once again, you have to understand the difference between... He's throwing out a lot of terms, and he's not really defining them well. So understanding the difference between syndicalism versus, Marxian socialism, as he put it. Those are two different things, ultimately. Worker co-ops, this and that. What became, the difference is that, you had, more of, Marxist-Leninism, as you saw in the Soviet Union, and you saw, the worker, worker communism, or war communism, that sort of thing. So, it was a very different thing. But yeah, let's continue.
He was marrying nationalism with radicalism and with the concept of politics embracing a broader entity than the merely political sphere, that it had to organize the nation and the society and economy. And of course, that was a form of, so in Italy it was called corporatism. And as you say, they never used that term, national socialism. It was national corporatism, and didn't have quite the same structure, you might find. National socialism proper was a Central European idea that developed first in Austria and in Czech Bohemia, and to a certain extent Germany. But this is, using the most commonly identifiable terms, this is the general idea.
We have a short clip that I want to play. Just this is from one of my earlier films, Death of a Nation, where you can see Mussolini, who became the paradigmatic.
You know what? I don't care about your little bullshit clip. Oh, he gets it out. Okay. Oh, he clicked. Okay.
Figure of early fascism. Listen.
Oh, he does actually show it. Okay. I don't care about your silly movie, frankly.
Giving rise to early fascism. Now, you write in A History of Fascism that in some ways a lot of the classic elements that we associate with fascism.
Huh?
I need another Band-Aid.
Were actually.
Just keep it going. All right, hold on. All right, I'm going to edit the hell out of this. Okay, let's continue on. All right.
Actually developed by Lenin. I just want to read. You talk about the idea of the coup d'etat, seizing power with armed force, one-party dictatorship, the effort at total control of all institutions, the notion of personality and charismatic leadership, and then later, even concentration camps, large-scale forced labor, the liquidation or elimination of whole classes of people. We think of this as fascist, as associated with Hitler, but you're saying in a way that Lenin invented the system. Why are there links or similarities? Or how would you describe the link between Leninism on the one hand and fascism on the other?
The fascist movement in Italy was a project to nationalize leftist radicalism, and also in some ways to partially domesticate it, and was conceived as a kind of a revolutionary rivalry with Leninism. The problem with Leninism from the Mussolinian point of view was the fact that it was internationalist, was not a national movement, and in Italy, therefore, could not be an Italianist movement. So it was conceived as a revolutionary rivalry. And the relationship with Leninism had to do, of course, with fascism as the main opponent of Leninism to create a different kind of revolution. But of course, the fascist revolution was really ultimately of a different sort from the socialist revolution proper, because it was a kind of anthropological revolution.
When we come back, I want to ask Professor Payne.
So, okay, I agree with this professor. All right, he clearly knows what he's talking about, but this doesn't really prove Dinesh D'Souza's point, in my opinion. But audience, when you see this, you tell me.
And more about what he means by anthropological revolution. I also want to dive into one of the leading theoreticians of fascism, the Italian thinker Giovanni Gentile. All of this, of course, relevant to our discussions today.
Oh, wow. Okay, so they're going in depth. All right.
About whether there are, and we'll ask Professor Payne about this, fascist strains in American politics today. We'll be right back.
Okay, let's go ahead and skip this bullshit. All right. No, I don't care about your ads.
Effort to create a sort of a new man, but maybe a new man different from the one that Lenin sought to create?
That's exactly the idea. All fascist movements, if they belonged to the species politics that we call fascism or generic fascism, aimed at the new man. That was the title, for example, of the newspaper of the strong fascist movement in Romania. And they all had the same idea, though they expressed it in somewhat different ways in different countries, that it was necessary really to transform human nature, so to speak, to create a different kind of human culture, different kind of society, not just in solving economic problems. Fascism was supposed to deal with the economic problems that created socialism or the desire for socialism, but beyond that, to go well beyond solving economic problems, not by simply centralizing all ownership in the hands of the state, but rather by creating a new kind of human being who would form a new different psychology. He would be the new man, a different and superior kind of human being.
Yeah, but hold on. Let's be careful about what we say here. Because the thing is, they say these things, but the thing is, though, is a lot of things didn't change ultimately. You know, as for example, if you want to bring up Nazi Germany, the Junkers. Now, Junkers, of course, that's a word that, you know, if you really understood in German, it has a lot of meanings. But the Junkers, in terms of the folks that owned the land, you know, the landowners in Germany, they still had control of their territory. I can't speak for Italy in particular and some massive sort of thing, but I imagine this goes into the idea. I haven't heard the term yet, the term class collaboration. I haven't heard that yet, but maybe, like I say, it's an idea of the new man and all that. Okay, yeah, that's what they preached early on. But like I say, nowadays, what does that really mean? You know?
Now, it's interesting, you're talking about fascism in different countries. A lot of people associate fascism either just with Germany or maybe Germany and Italy, but there was fascism in France, there was fascism in Belgium, there was fascism even in England, and it's very interesting. It seems to me when you look at some of the key figures in British fascism, of course, Oswald Mosley, who was a member of the British Labour Party, and therefore on the left. In France, I think of
No. Oswald Mosley at best was a social democrat. And like I said, the left, if you want to look at it in terms of that, people do not see social democrats as left wing. They see them more as centrists, or maybe slightly left wing, if we want to put it to this false dichotomy of left and right. Also, the thing is that, you know, Oswald Mosley had relations to the crown. So let's be careful about throwing around terms like that.
Of Jean Alemán, who was associated with the Dreyfus case, Marcel Diet, Jacques Doriot, who was member of the French Communist Party. The point I'm trying to get at is that it appears like many of the...
So the thing is that he's basically just cherry picking. He's cherry picking. Yeah, that's what he's doing. It's just like, I mean, you could say that because Goebbels was friends with a socialist and promoted to say that, you know, Lenin was a great leader, this and that, because Goebbels said that at one time means that he was on the left too. I mean, that's a stretch, because guess what? Goebbels was a part of plenty of right-wing groups.
The leading figures of fascism were or came from the left. Wouldn't that may be a surprise to many people that fascism originated from figures who were seen as leftist, not as on the right?
You could make a kind of division between most of Western Europe and Central and East Central Europe. Fascism in Western Europe tended to originate on the left, with the partial exception of Spain. But in Germany and in East Central Europe, fascism came more out of the right than out of the left. The truth of the matter, of course, is you have fascists from both extremes and from the
Yep.
middle as
Okay, so I was talking some shit about this guy earlier, but it sounds like he's actually. I wasn't sure. It does make more sense now that I read about him. So once again, it doesn't sound like Dinesh D'Souza is winning any arguments with this. He's basically saying they come from both extremes, idiot. You know, it's not just left wing folks, and this idea that, oh, well, the Nazis were actually left wing. No, he's saying that they come from everywhere. You know, go ahead.
as well. And the aspiration of fascism, the fascists said, was to synthesize the left and the right, to take the best of both the left and the right.
Yeah.
And the Italians said also liberalism. And
Knowledge Bowl also says that as well. You know, that's what people like, not Georg Strasser, but Otto Strasser tried to say that. You know, now of course that's a whole different bit of cringe, but you know, even people like I mentioned Karl Otto Pytel thought similar things, but you know, they never really got to power, so we'll never know, right?
created an entirely new political composition, a new form and expression that would have the best of all the worlds, but operate as a more dynamic, more unified, more vital and creative force than one could find from any leftist revolutionary movement or from the old liberalism and conservatism.
Yep.
Now, when you say that fascism, in a sense, mobilized both from the left and the right, are you referring specifically to the European right? And what I mean by that is that when we use the term right in America and in Europe, we typically mean something a little bit different, right? The American right is anchored in a classical liberalism because, of course, its roots are in the American founding. And so, for example, the American right is seen as pro-free market, pro-liberal in that sense. The European right, not quite so, right? The European right has been to some...
So, okay, so this guy, he's shit. This is called moving the goalposts, at least in my opinion, where he's like, well, actually, these things are different, and you know, the right wing in the United States. So basically, he is saying that conservatives and right wing folks in the U.S. are basically classical liberals. This is something that people have already known. So now he's moving the goalposts a little bit here. You have to realize that. The more information that comes out, he has to move the goalposts and say, well, yeah, we basically just love markets. That's basically all it is. We love capitalism.
Some degree status, just like the European left. So would it be important, do you think, to make a distinction here between the European right and the American right? And am I right in thinking...
Oh, boy. The thing is, he's not going to mention the silver shirts. He's not going to mention Coughlin. He's not going to mention the American Bund, the German-American Bund, with leaders like, I can't think of his name, but was it Kuntz or something like that? Yeah, go ahead.
Thinking that fascism was anti-liberal, anti-free market, and anti-capitalist.
Absolutely. This was essential to fascism, to regulate the market. That was the idea of National Socialism in the Central European countries, and that was also the idea of fascist corporatism. Your basic point is correct. The United States has no right in the European sense. What is called the right in the United States really refers to people who are to the right of the left, but they are indeed, in most cases, classical liberals. Very hard to find a European-style rightist in the United States. In Europe, there was a hard right coming out of monarchism in the first place, the old-style monarchist, traditionalist, and authoritarian right.
People like Leon Degrelle, who later became a National Socialist and wrote many books about the Waffen-SS. Yeah, people like that, from the Rexist Party in Belgique.
Right, though not nearly as authoritarian as 20th century radicalism. And then there developed, by the end of the 19th century, new forms of the radical right in Europe, a kind of authoritarian nationalism with a different sort of program. But there was no counterpart to that in the United States at all, then or now.
When we come back, I want to delve into the
Okay.
reason I want to talk about him is because it seems that what you have here in Gentile is a fully developed statist ideology. Gentile begins by saying that the whole Lockean idea that we're individuals who make a social compact and come together as
Oh,
a
please.
society.
Is this Sargon? Oh, boy. Read Locke. Read Locke, bro. Go ahead.
He goes, that's not how it is. Human beings are inherently communal. Human beings are inherently groupish. And so the
Yeah.
state reflects, if you will, the perfection of the personality of the individual writ large. Gentile goes on to talk about the concept of totalitarianism, which for him, by the way, is not really a bad thing. What he really means is that the state, reflecting, if you will, the collective will of individuals, supervises over the whole society and dominates decision-making throughout the society. Isn't this, in a way, the philosophical apparatus of fascism, the idea of a strong centralized state? And if so, is it...
Oh, please. The U.S. has a strong centralized state, too. How is he going to make he's going to make a huge leap somewhere in here, probably towards the end, between Joe Biden and and Mussolini somehow. I don't know how, but let's go ahead and hear this.
That's something that today we would associate, certainly in America, with the left rather than with the right?
That point is absolutely correct. Very
No.
well taken. Regarding Gentile, I should point out he was not an intellectual who lived in a garret. He was Italy's leading academic philosophy professor. He dominated the profession in the Italian universities. And he was...
See, he's, once again, what basically Dinesh D'Souza is saying is that he's trying to push everybody out and to say, only these few conservatives are really fighting for the future of America. We're going to hold to individual liberties and this and that. But we still love the market. We still love those markets. We still love My Pillow and all this sort of thing. This is why this whole right and left stuff is nonsense. And I hope that somebody will some group will probably deconstruct it and will continue to deconstruct the idea of left wing versus right wing, because these are such outdated terms. Yeah, this goes back to the French Revolution and everything else like that, but it's so overused. Go ahead.
He was a philosopher of idealism, but developed his own kind of idealism, which he called actualism. That is, that idealism is not going to be of any consequence unless you carry it out in practice and really make it predominant in society. And therefore, the way to do this was through what he called lo stato etico, the ethical state. And the strong centralized state, the fascist state, would be the ethical state, because it would carry out the highest ideals, infuse the educational system with them, and make them the dominant goals of Italian government and of Italian society. This was Gentile's approach to fascism, not what people normally think of course, as fascism.
Yeah, I have here actually a copy of a slim volume. It's called The Origins and Doctrine of Fascism by Gentile. And I'm really struck by these resounding statements that he makes. I'm going to quote one here. He goes, "For fascism, the state and the individual are one." And then he goes on to say the legitimate will of citizens is that will that corresponds to the will of the state. So what you have here is, I think to a degree that goes even beyond anything we hear from the left in this country, the notion that the state is this sort of moral being that embodies the society as a whole, and that the individual, in a sense, is lost and has no real identity.
Okay, this is. I'm going to simplify. I'm going to hugely oversimplify things, and I've seen this argument that goes on. This is versus basically the state versus the business. All right, or the corporation. We'll complicate it even more. Ultimately, it's either we rely on the state to do everything, or we rely on corporations to do it. That's basically what it is. And you'll see that, there are a lot of folks who will try to play it off and try to say, well, actually, corporations want individual liberty and all this sort of stuff. That's the libertarian sort of idea. Versus folks that, maybe you have your fascists or your MLs or your other folks like that, maybe even anarchists to some degree, who will say, actually, the state can provide things for the people better than corporations, and corporations need to be controlled by the state. And, deregulation, all this is the battle that goes back and forth, right, between these two ideas. And like I say, it goes back and forth, doesn't it? That's where you get into the idea of third positionism, right? You get into the idea of, well, actually, some things should be relied on with businesses, with local business, or maybe small businesses and corporations, and other things need to be done by the state, right? That's the whole idea of it, where it's like, yeah, some things need to be done here, other things need to be done here. Let's pick and choose what should be done by the state and what should be done by corporations, right? Now, of course, you'll have like the Dutch East India Company, which it was the state and the company and state and business were of the same thing. Or even with, the Belgian Congo, that was one and the same thing, right? But now with this separation between the two, people have to choose this or that, right? But yeah, that's my explanation of it.
Not even any real freedom outside of the collective power of the state. Would that be an accurate summary, do you think, of what he
Yes,
believes?
that is a correct definition and summary of gentilianism. Now, Italian fascism is very protean. There are all kinds of cultural and intellectual currents, and different people define things in different ways, but the idea of this unified ethical idealist state was the essence of gentilianism. And beyond that, you can say that.
So it's interesting to me while I'm thinking about this is, okay, he said that fascism is even, like I said, that fascism even goes further than what the modern left does today. And of course, in his mind, he thinks that people like AOC are somehow left-wing. Not really. I mean, she's just a corporate Democrat who still, gets her money and everything else like that. But that's a whole different story. But it's amazing to me that people like this, will still talk about these various issues, and think that they are relevant. They are not.
That Italian fascism made the concept of the state as a unified national actor, integrating the people, more central as far as the state itself was concerned, conceptually and philosophically, than any other radical movement of 20th century Europe, more than the Nazis, more than the communists, because the communists emphasized the party, especially the party and the working class. The state was merely the instrument of the party and the working class. In Italian fascism, the state was an entity in and of itself.
Let's turn for a moment, if we will, to Germany and to German National Socialism. It's often said, I often see, particularly on social media now in America today, that when the Nazis used the phrase National Socialism, which was actually the name of their party, that they didn't really mean it.
Well, no, hold on. It was called the NSDAP, the Nationalsozialist Deutsches Arbeitspartei. So National Socialist German Workers' Party. That's what it was called. It has worker in the name. Now, of course, it goes back to, hold on. I'm going to edit this down too, don't worry. And that goes to Anton Drexler. So before Hitler came along, Anton Drexler, who was a worker, I think he was like a machinist by trade, I think, from what I remember. Anton Drexler, let me make sure here. I'm going to go ahead and do this just the one time. Let me make sure here. So yeah, Anton Drexler was part of the Volkisch movement, machine fitter. railway toolmaker and locksmith in Berlin. He's believed to have been disappointed with his income and have played the zither in restaurants to supplement his earnings. Did not serve in the armed forces in the First World War. He was deemed unfit for service. During the Fatherland Party, a short-lived far-right party, active during the last phase of the war, which played a significant role in the emergence of the stab-in-the-back myth. Thule Society, as they always say. Dietrich Eckart. Gottfried Feder, of course, is the guy who wrote, was part of the 25 Points. Died in 1942, a lengthy illness due to alcoholism. So, I think that's important to kind of say that there is a big difference between these things. I'm going to probably break this up into at least 2 bits here. That way, y'all can be like, holy crap, I'm not going to sit through 2 hours of this. And I don't blame you.
They weren't really socialists at all, that they were maybe using it in the same way that the Iranian Republic calls themselves a republic, even though they're not really a republic, or the old German Democratic Republic, the communist East Germany called themselves a democratic republic, but the name was really meaningless. Is it the case that the name Nazi or National Socialist was just some kind of a ruse, or did the Nazis really think they were National Socialists?
The Nazis really believed they were National Socialists, and it's important to understand that National Socialism was a developed political economic concept in Central Europe that developed in the 1870s and 80s, more than a generation prior to the rise of the Nazis, in fact, beginning nearly 2 generations before, and was a coherent concept in and of itself because it emphasized a kind of limited socialism in which the government took the initiative in helping to organize the economy, but leaving most property in private hands, subordinating the entire economy and productive system not to the profit of the capitalists, but to the well-being of the entire nation. The capitalists would still own most property, but it would be organized and given different priorities and serve different ends.
This is kind of the idea of what people talk about with third positionism. Now, of course, people will say, oh, well, third positionism never took place in National Socialist Germany. Like I say, that's a whole other argument. But, okay, all right.
It was a coherent concept of National Socialism, not total state socialism, as in the Soviet Union, but National Socialism. And this was what the Nazis put into practice. And they were, of course, in the peacetime years before the war began, very successful in their economic policies.
Let me ask you this, and of course,
Now, of course, what people will say about that economic, success was because they got money from, the West and, from Wall Street and whatnot. What, people like Andrew Sutton will say, take him with a grain of salt, like I say. But, is that they got money from him and they tried to institute, the Happy and Joy program and this and that by, and you had people like Dr. Robert Ley, and they tried to, give everyone a Volkswagen vehicle. And they tried to have, relaxing centers, for example. Of course, now, ironically, of course, that area is now being rebuilt and they're trying to make them into like small houses for like Berlin urbanites, basically, to live. I can't remember where, but it's over on the Baltic coast, I believe. But, the thing is that it was unsuccessful. They were never going to produce that many Volkswagen cars for everybody. This and that, the Beetle. But yeah, let's see if he actually talks about that.
Got to put in the caveat that at no time are we suggesting, or am I suggesting, any kind of direct analogy between America and Nazism. But I do notice, Professor Payne, in American politics today, to a remarkable degree, we
see. Look at that. He's very look. Dinesh D'Souza is covering his ass. He used to outright say this, but now he's saying, not to say that you can make a comparison, but because he knows that he would be skewered for trying to say that America today is going to be some fascist thing. No, absolutely not.
We have this phenomenon of the woke or politically active corporation. Literally hundreds of corporations jumping into political causes, signing statements.
This is called lip service. Even I have to, come on, man. It's lip service. These companies still operate the same way that they always have. They will still do corporate takeovers. They will still do all this. It is about, yep, that's fine.
Yes.
I know. What you doing, Curry?
Declaring that they will divest from, let's say, the state of Georgia. They will not do business with places. So what I'm getting at is this notion of trying to coordinate the private corporate sector, including, by the way, digital media, on behalf of
this is okay. So now he's doing some cope. He's doing some cope right now. Go ahead.
Objectives. Do you see some I came to America in the late 1970s. I've never seen so much politicization of corporate America on behalf of state objectives as I see now. Do you see that trend in America, and are you a little troubled by it?
Okay. This is very, very bad faith here. We had to get through it because there were some points that I could be like, but now. Because the thing is, look, if you read the work of people like, I'm sure if you read Anton Drexler a bit more, or if you read the works of other ideologists at the time, I'm trying to think of his name now, I can't think of it, Anton Eckhart, and people like Gottfried Feder, that's who I was thinking of, sorry, of Gottfried Feder, you would see that they praised Krupp immensely. They praised Krupp immensely in their works and be like, Krupp was the greatest thing ever. He did, the Krupp family has done so much for Germany, this and that. And they're basically talking about their son and, the son who was running Krupp by that point. There was an old guy who, Grandpa Krupp was running, but really his son was running the show a lot of the time. And even then he had mixed views about it. And you had Tyson as well, Thyssen. And of course, Krupp Tyson still exists, and they're still making elevators and everything else, And they even had, like I say, this is something that's very important to talk about with National Socialism, is that they had, like I say, once again, they had their own economic development plan. So they would go to the, these capitalists and say, okay, Ferdinand Porsche and all these other folks would say, yeah, you're going to make sure that this is done, but they also were able to kiss their ass too, like I say. So, yeah.
And my advisor suggested the figure of Jose Antonio Primo de Rivera, the founder and leader of the Spanish Fascist Party. And so...
Okay. You need to stop calling it Fascist Party. It's the Phalangist Party. At least say it right.
I developed that into a dissertation and a book, which was quite successful. And rather grandiosely, I subtitled it History of Spanish Fascism. Though I thought I could identify the movement as a fascist type movement. But on the other hand, I knew very little about fascism.
This is okay. Grandpa is not going to answer the question the way that Dinesh D'Souza wants. I can already tell you. He's going to, like I say, he's going to make a real stretch of it to say, oh, well, there's censorship online and they're censoring folks and, the wokeness and everything else like that. The state is making corporations bend to their will. No, the federal government will bend to the will of corporations like nobody's fucking business, all right? This Green New Deal type stuff, and I guarantee the Green New Deal is going to come up eventually. No. Come on. They get money from, like I said, will Dinesh D'Souza ever mention lobbyists? I doubt it, but let's hear more of this.
As almost anyone knew very little about fascism in general in those days. And this developed an interest in the broader phenomenon, which I worked on for a period of 20 years before I finally wrote my first book about fascism itself, because the phenomenon was bewildering at that point in history, probably still is.
Let me ask you about fascism, where it's a word that continues, as you know, to be, I think, quite promiscuously bandied about. You make a remarkable statement early on. This is from your book, A History of Fascism. You say the nucleus that eventually founded fascism in Italy, and of course, fascism really began as a national phenomenon in Italy. It came to Germany only much later, a decade later. The nucleus that eventually founded fascism in Italy you say, did not stem from the right-wing nationalists, but from a transformation on the part of the revolutionary left. Now,
okay, see, he's still pushing, like I say, once again, he's still pushing the idea that fascism comes from the left. He's still pushing this nonsense. He's still pushing it. And he's not even going to defend monarchism. You notice that? He's not even going to talk about that or talk about people like Landegrill. Because he knows that ruins his idea.
This may come as a surprise to people that fascism emerges in Italy from the left, that Mussolini, the leading figure of Italian fascism, came out of the Marxist tradition. So what happened on...
He keeps saying Marxist tradition. He was just a socialist. I don't think necessarily he was a full-on Marxist. This is very bad faith.
The left that gave birth to this kind of new hybrid called fascism?
Well, it was a phenomenon of World War I, process of nationalization of a minority of the revolutionary left in Italy, particularly the sector that called themselves revolutionary syndicate.
Oh, shit, did I go back? I didn't even realize that. Hold on.
Investors have, and convert a portion of your retirement account.
I should point out he was not an intellectual who lived in a garret. He was Italy's leading academic philosophy.
I'm going to have to edit the hell out of
developed
this.
by a kind of a radical intelligentsia, kind of the same way that Bolshevik doctrine was developed in Russia, but it infiltrated the universities more and more.
Oh,
universities
okay. Okay, so this is cultural Bolshevism now. Okay, and cultural Marxism, yeah.
Were basically quite conservative in Germany during that period, though not all sectors of them were. And the Nazi movement was able to take over the universities, but it came from outside. It was in that sense, fascism was quite different from the American Cultural Revolution. The American Cultural Revolution was developed especially in the universities and then applied to the educational system as a whole, and that is specifically American. That is different from the process of radicalization.
Once again, oh, everything about America is great. Like I say, ultimately, this is the problem with these types of folks. Well, like I said, this is your own chauvinism showing. You know, maybe I'm using that the wrong way, but your own American chauvinism is showing this idea that, well, America did it this way, and actually it was better than the way the Nazis did it. Go ahead.
In European fascism or in European communism, at least in the original stages.
Let me ask you about the media, which ties into all this, because it seemed like in the Nazi case, you had a propaganda minister, Goebbels, and he was, in a sense, the face of Nazi propaganda. Of course, you had Leni Riefenstahl and others making movies that glamorized and dramatized the Nazi idea of the will. But in America today, we have something quite different, which is we have a free press. We've got innumerable organs of journalism.
Okay, once again, the idea of a free press is nonsense in the U.S. today. The reason is that it's just a little bit, its facade is seen as free, but no, it's not free. The thing is that there are people that, you know, dare I say this, but it's like, you know, when you see the anarchists or whatever, you think that, you know, Unicorn Riot is seen as mainstream media, as much as they are as cringe as they are, as cringe as Unicorn Riot is, they are not mainstream media. They do not allow that type of footage to be seen on TV or on the radio or wherever else. You don't see it. You know, you'll see CNN or you'll see Fox News, but this is the problem with conservatives, though. This is why a lot of Wignats will hate conservatives. This is why I don't like conservatives. It's the idea that, well, we don't like the left and whatnot, but we still have a free press. We still have that. No, we don't. The thing is that, you know, say what you will, but people like Glenn Greenwald, as cringe as he is, he has his cringe moments, but he was drummed out of the mainstream media. We'll see that these, you know, we have seen these old boomers are being kicked out of journalism today. You know, they're being kicked out because they're seen as, you know, too prejudiced and all this other stuff. So this is nonsense, in my opinion. I don't have any other arguments necessarily to say that media is free, but still a free press. But yeah.
And yet there seems to be something of the same lockstep quality to it, but you don't have a Goebbels directing the process. How do you explain this peculiarity where, for example, controversial stories, I think off the top of my head of the Hunter Biden story, just go unreported, but thousands of journalists are making an independent decision. We're not going to cover this one. So how do you achieve?
Okay, the thing is, let's say this about the Hunter Biden thing with the laptop and with all the secret stuff that he had with mosquitoes and whatnot. The thing is that a lot of that came from Taiwan. You know, a lot of that video footage came from Taiwan, and a lot of folks were just said, we don't want to cover that. But bruh, you think that the media is different somewhere else? Come on, man. Look, all Western liberal nations are not going to allow people to just be like, well, it's different in other countries. But to say that they'll just allow the same type of stuff that you would just see on the internet, come on, man. Are you serious? Hunter Biden. Because you think that Grandpa here knows about Hunter Biden? I doubt he gives a shit.
Gleichschaltung in America without a Goebbels to call the music.
No.
Basically because of the success of the Cultural Revolution in the United States by the early 21st century, the fact that a process that to a large extent began in the universities was successful in taking over the educational system and American culture, so that there was created from within the cultural institutions themselves, not because of the slightest imposition from the outside, but within those institutions themselves, a kind of system of one-party media. And here the key philosopher is not any fascist or any classical communist, but one of the major figures in Italian communist theory, Antonio Gramsci.
Oh, so we finally mentioned Gramsci. Okay, go ahead.
Said that socialism and communism had failed in Italy in the 1920s because it was too weak in the culture, and that you could only succeed in radical politics if, first of all, you developed a very broad basis in the general culture itself, and particularly in the elite institutions of culture. If you carried out the Cultural Revolution before you attempted the political revolution. That was the essence of Gramscianism, and the American New Left essentially followed a Gramscian tactic after the failure of its terrorist turn at the beginning of the 1970s. By the mid-1970s, the American New Left had basically turned to Gramscianism as a revolutionary tactic.
Hold on. Is Grandpa saying that Gramsci created the idea of a cultural revolution? That Mao Zedong had nothing to do with a cultural revolution? Woo! The Maoists are steaming. They are seething right now. Are you serious? Woo! That's a hot take, Grandpa. Man, oh man. Woo! I'd like to see a quote of where Gramsci said that. I haven't read Gramsci that much. I can't really say, but this, woo, that's a hot take.
To develop its influence in broader American institutions, and it has worked very well.
When we come back, I want to
skip past this bullshit. All right.
Ask you about Antifa, because we've got an organization which I guess
Antifa are the real fascists. Come on. Antifa are LARPers. That's all they are.
Has its roots that go back half a century or so. This idea of an organization.
I will just say this is the idea of Antifa are the real fascists, or are they this, are they really leftists? They're just LARPers. They're not going to overthrow the system. All right. They're not. Okay. Anti-fascists are just folks that want to fight the Proud Boys and think that they're, and, claim to fight capitalism. But in reality, they're just LARPers who cover up for the fact that people are setting fires. Okay. That's it. That's all they are. They're not going to do anything to change anything. They're they're just upset kids who aren't going to do anything. Well, you know what? Let me put that back. They're upset kids some of whom may continue on to actually become legitimate Marxist-Leninists or anarchists, but many of them are probably going to wake up and be like, I don't really like this anymore. And they are simply being adventurists. I'll put it that way.
Organization mobilized against fascists, except when I see them looting businesses and attacking courthouses and shouting at people who are Republicans and conservatives, I don't see any fascists on the other side. What's the deal with...
And of course, what they will say is, well, what happened at Charlottesville? What about those Proud Boys? Of course, he's probably going to say the Proud Boys are just conservatives who want to bring America back, right? This is why people hate politics, because you get this rigmarole run around that goes on, right? Between, well, this is what it actually means to be left wing. No, this is what it actually means. This is what it means to be a fascist. No, this is what it means. You have this tug of war. And these circle jerk groups that go back and forth that they all believe the same fucking thing. It's so tiring. It really is. This is why it's like I used to identify as Nosbo loosely, but at this point, I don't even care. I'm just going to say it right here and now. And I know if someone's going to hear this, and if I was some big name, this is where the point you get to recording, okay? I'm an opportunist at this point. I don't even give a fuck about ideologies because they're all fucking cringe, all right? All these political groups have no power. They will never gain power, all right? Or at least not right now anyway. They will not gain power in this time, all right? Within the next 5 to 10 years, they will not take power. People will continue to cope and will say, AOC is going to bring things around. No, she is not. Or, Wignats will promote whoever, is vaguely, no, it's not going to happen, man. Go ahead.
Antifa, and is this positioning of them as being anti-fascist something of a tactic?
It's absolutely a tactic. Anti-fascism without fascism, which has been a growing phenomenon among the left in the Western world ever since the 1950s. Fascism as an empty signifier, what the left calls an empty signifier, is the perfect foil. And anti-fascism, for that matter, was invented really as a general slogan, as a general process outside of Italy, throughout Europe, by the Communist International in 1923, was fundamental, except during the years of the Hitler-Stalin Pact. Antifa stems first from a communist organization in Germany in 1932 called Antifascistische Aktion, anti-fascist act.
Yeah, we fucking know what the come on, Grandpa, we know that. And then even once again, you have to bring this up too, Grandpa, is that Otto Strasser, the infamous, brother of, the Strasser brothers, the other one being killed during the Night of the Long Knives, his Black Front joined Antifa. That's true. Once again, look that up and join these guys. But of course, people like that don't want to understand nuance. Let's hear more of this.
Action, and then was revived among the European and British left 40 or 50 years ago, and in more recent years has become a major organization in the United States to combat fascism.
Okay. It is not one thing. I've given up and I've accepted. Antifa is not one thing. Rose City Antifa and New York City Antifa are not the same thing. Los Angeles Antifa versus, I don't know, whichever Wyoming Antifa group exists or whatever, they're all different things. They all operate from different structures. They all have different tactics or whatever the case may be. They may have similarities. They may all dress in black bloc or whatever, but they all don't see things the same way. To see it as one single organization is nonsense. it's the same thing to try to, it's like, yeah, the Proud Boys, that is an organization. They all kind of fit the same mold. Or even Ku Klux Klan. They fit, one singular idea. Antifa, at least as it's purported, is not to be seen as one organization. Some of them may use the 3 arrows stuff, and others may not. That's just the way it is. That's, and obviously 3 arrows comes from, the Suck Dems, really. Social Democratic Party of Germany. But yeah.
Since fascism doesn't exist, it has to be invented, caricatured, and defined artificially as the enemy of a radical movement which has goals of its own, merely instrumentalizing the use of a kind of anti-fascism to achieve these revolutionary goals.
And wouldn't it be fair to say that, the Antifa types regarded Trump as the quintessential fascist, but in the way that we've been talking about fascism, the devotion to an all-powerful centralized state, the idea of fascism being anti-market and anti-capitalist and
anti-market, boy. The markets. We got to love the markets, right? The markets that have caused people to lose jobs, the markets that are given, the financial institutions that were bailed out in 2008. Oh boy. Are you really going to go to bat for them? All right.
Anti-liberal. Would it be fair to say that Trump is in no regard of whatever you think of Trump? He's not a fascist, and this was part of their strategic caricature to create a fascism where no fascism existed.
Yes, that was fundamental from the 2016 campaign on. I did a whole series of interviews with various journalists in 2016, revolving around the question, is Donald Trump a fascist? And in fact, he had few of the characteristics of fascism, and his presidency was completely unfascist.
I haven't even, I'm not, like I say, I'm not going to watch every single minute. I skipped a fair amount, but I don't think he's brought up Umberto Eco. I'm sure that they probably won't even mention Umberto Eco. Maybe they've already moved past that, but it's just so, go ahead.
Just because he endeavored to reduce the size of the central government, and he avoided military activity whenever he could, with only a few strategic exceptions, so that it was a very un-fascist presidency.
So hold on.
Not to mention, Professor Payne, I never saw any signs that Trump was trying to, shut down CNN. His critics would flay him on every platform,
Okay, hold on. So let's be fair about this whole Trump is a fascist thing. All right. What a lot of people will say is that he organized a base, that he was seen as a central leader, much the same way as Hitler was seen as that way, all right? Like I say, once again, I don't believe any of this fake wad necessarily, but this is what people think. This is what a lot of folks say, that they saw him as a Fuhrer. They saw him as somebody who was a central leader, right? And yeah, the thing is that, once again, you could say, oh, well, he did, he avoided military conflict as much as he could, to a point. The thing is, he did still use the Moab in Syria. He still moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, causing things to be that much worse, for Israeli and Palestinian, relations, I should say. He moved troops around, from Syria to there, going back and forth on Assad. Tried to be tough on Russia because, of course, people always said, oh, well, Trump was involved with Russia and the Republicans love Russia, which is still going to be promoted, even though that now they realize that the whole business about the Afghanistan, bounty was nonsense. They don't actually believe that to be true.
Every second of every day, and Trump didn't do anything about it. Wouldn't Mussolini or Hitler have stepped right in and shut those people up overnight?
Oh, of course, they both had.
The thing is, now, once again, it goes to show how much of a wuss Donald Trump is. He's the typical conservative. This is something that a lot of Wignats who did support Donald Trump in 2015, 2016, and even early 2017 believed. Up until, of course, once Charlottesville happened, and they said that they were fine people on both sides. That old chestnut. I don't care about that. But the thing is, beyond that, are all the prosecutions that occurred, and even MAGA-Ps that were arrested, that he's not going to bat for. And even January 6th, all the folks that are being arrested and that have already been, or already been convicted. These folks are not going to get any help from Donald Trump. It goes to show just how, I think that once again, D'Souza here is showing just how weak conservatism as an ideology is, and how dead of an ideology conservatism is. It goes to, but yeah, let's continue.
Censorship systems. There is a censorship system now in the United States, but it's a censorship system by the left, particularly by big tech.
Oh boy! If you think that Mark Zuckerberg is somehow working for the left, look, let's try to be honest once again. Let's try to be honest. Big tech does not care about left-wing or right-wing folks. They simply promote the things that are, considered to be not good. Okay, so this idea of left-wing versus right-wing, they'll take down left-wing folks just as much as they will take down right-wing folks. A lot of those YouTube channels, I meant to say Antifa Twitter accounts. Once Joe Biden took office, a lot of those were taken down by Jack Dorsey. Okay, just as much as, Alex Jones was kicked off of all that, and, and people were like either ha 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 or oh my gosh, this is terrible. But the thing is that this has been, they don't care to have this ignorant view that, oh, well, big tech is left wing. No. What do you mean to say that? You think that Susan Wojcicki here on YouTube is actually left wing? No. These are, centrist sort of, I hate to use the term, and I probably, I'm sure someone will say that's not really neoliberalism, but of neolibs who just want to continue to make money. They don't care about ideology. They just care about making their money. And more specifically, they care about keeping the money flowing in. So whatever political ideology they feel will keep that going, then that's what it is. Much the same thing as Lord Rothschild said. Let people make the laws. Let people do this. As long as I control the money, I don't care. And that's, that's really the attitude of, of big tech. As long as, people can say whatever the hell they want online. As long as we can police ourselves so that the government will leave us alone, we don't care. And that's the truth of it, in my opinion. You can feel differently, but that's how I see it.
Close out any kind of expression of which the leaders and owners of big tech disapprove. The whole game about inventing fascism out of whole cloth is a political tactic to demonize the opposition. It's a form of stigmatization. Stigmatization is the name of the game, and depends on the identification of fascist characteristics. All political movements have certain characteristics in common. That doesn't mean they should be confused for each other. All radical movements particularly have more characteristics in common, whether left or right. The fact that Trump was a strong leader, and strong leadership was characteristic of fascism, ergo meant in this peculiar kind of...
They did mention Umberto, okay, earlier. Yeah, I thought so, okay. I thought they did. All right, well, I'm not going to go back. Sorry.
Thinking, Trump had to be a fascist. A strong leader on the left, of course, was not a fascist, because these definitions, the use of them, are entirely arbitrary.
I also think of the way that people would say that Trump is a fascist because he's a nationalist. But of course, when they said that, I would think of people like Gandhi in India or Mandela in South Africa or even Fidel Castro in Cuba. These were all dedicated nationalists, but no one would dream of calling them fascists per se.
Okay, hold on. Gandhi, a nationalist. I would say Nehru would be more of a nationalist. Okay, but Gandhi? I mean, I guess you could say. I mean, he was more of a Indian chauvinist, maybe. And maybe I'm misusing that term because I'm so screwed up in the head. But no. And then Nelson Mandela. You know, of course, I mean, I'm sure that he would say that Nelson Mandela was purely a communist. The thing is, I mean, I would say that Nelson Mandela was a communist for the time being, but then, you know, basically just wanted to be in charge. Now, his wife was much more of a straight up nationalist, I think. Comparatively, you know, Winnie Mandela was perfectly okay with using, you know, necklacing to keep people in charge. Okay. And then Castro? Once again, I think that that's a little bit more complicated to say. But let's go ahead and continue.
Well, of course, there are all kinds of nationalists, from the most statist revolutionary nationalists on the left all the way across the political spectrum. Nationalism has become overall the most...
You could have said Charles de Gaulle even, but you chose... Okay, go ahead.
Universal movement probably of modern times, so that you can do any kind of hyphenate nationalism. Fascist nationalism is merely one of the 17 different...
This makes my brain hurt so bad. To say fascist nationalism, it's just like saying Islamofascism or like Christofascism. It makes my brain hurt because, like, why do people make it so? This is why people don't like politics. Once again, this is another reason why. You put some fancy fucking words on top of shit. We're going to use Christofascism, Islamofascism, and fascist nationalism. It's just like, you could just say, like I say, I'll have to give it to the left in this case. Keep it simple, where you have more of a reactionary nationalism versus more of a proletariat nationalism. A reactionary nationalism talks about the race, and it talks about a nationality, you know, and about a history, and, you know, creating a new man and all that, as they were saying before, right? Versus a proletarian nationalism where it is much more about the average worker being able to have just as much say as someone who is in a party or is a politician of some sort, right? That's the whole idea of it. This is what the DPRK tries to teach about, right? This is what North Korea tries to do with Juche, you know, which is much more about self-reliance. To say that the average DPRK citizen has just as much power as, you know, as somebody else, right? Proletarian nationalism. You know, not, you know, fascist nationalism, and people make things very complicated because they want people, you know, because they want to make themselves self-important. And this is what they do when they start putting out these terms. And you have to read all their bullshit to try to understand what the fuck they're trying to say. And that makes it so much worse. Let's continue.
varieties of nationalism.
I want to ask you about the concept of Big Brother, but first I want to play a very short clip from an earlier film of mine, I believe.
Stop shilling. God damn.
Centralized government, massive state expenditure, more and more government interference in and control of the economy, and of course, the national integration of information and media to a greater extent, and therefore with the centralization of communications through big tech, the imposition of a kind of national censorship. the sort of thing that has never existed in America before. And it's a phenomenon that has appeared only in the
please. No, censorship has existed in the United States before. And it has happened on this level before. You're just coping because conservatives end up saying some bad shit. Okay? The thing is, like I say, TPUSA can continue to make their money. You can continue to make your money selling your bullshit. No, don't give me this nonsense. Come on. That's such cope. No. The thing is that, you think that censorship of books wasn't sent, the U.S. has a whole history of censorship, going back, a good 100 years, talking about the history of socialism in this nation. If you want to bring it to, the Haymarket Rebellion, going through, the Weather Underground, et cetera, the true history of these things. Apart from people that learn it maybe from academia, maybe cultural Marxism, people don't know about these histories. So yeah, you don't have, like I say, I've read some quotes, but the thing is, you don't have to burn books. All you have to do is put them in a library. That's the whole thing. You don't necessarily need censorship. You just, censorship means that it's something that's so popular that it has to be hidden. To me, you don't need censorship. You just need people that are ignorant. That's the whole line, isn't it? That's the real difference, isn't it? It's like, if you don't want people to learn about socialism, keep it in academia to a point where people don't know about it. You see what I'm saying?
21st century.
When we come back, I want to ask Professor Payne more about what is happening to our civil liberties, referring to. And the question I want to ask is that, when I came to America a generation ago, the left and the right were arguing about the economy, but they weren't arguing about basic civil liberties. This was not an America in which, let's say, the First Amendment was controversial, or the idea of due process of law. But we seem to live in a society now when there are people who say things like, why are we even having a trial over this Derek Chauvin business and George Floyd?
Who is saying that? Who is saying that? I mean, Dinesh, who is saying that, man? I don't think anybody is saying that. That's vigilantism. I think even the furthest, some of the more cringy anarchist LARPers out there are not dumb enough to say, oh, we should just execute them in the street. What? Who the fuck says that? No.
Just lock the guys straight up. Or people who say things like, free speech is overrated. Free speech should take a backseat to hate speech, or in other words, to the enforcement of regulation of hate speech. What do you make of?
Okay, the thing is, that the whole idea behind free speech is that what a lot of the left-wing folks will say, and the BreadTube folks will say this as well. I can't believe I have to agree with these folks, but it's like the idea that you should just be able to say whatever you will, whether it's anti-Semitic, whether it's just outright racist, or even have the veneer of being racist, and it's perfectly okay to use that, but, free speech, right? Or to say, say ridiculous things, as people like, Alex Jones did, to say, oh, well, those folks that died at, Sandy Hook, those were all crisis actors. Of course, he can't say that now because he got sued for it, And of course, yeah, fine. He's been proven right in other factors. Well done. Such as the freaking frog's gay and all that business. But the thing is that other things he had to back down from.
Of all these disturbing attacks on basic civil liberties that were not that long ago completely taken for granted across the political spectrum.
Well, again, we come back to the fact this is the effect of the Cultural Revolution, which simply does not respect the classical liberalism in any way. The limitation.
Classical liberalism. Oh my goodness, they've circled around to like Sargonite talking points now. Oh boy. Okay, we're almost done. Don't worry. I know this is like pulling teeth, guys. I know. Y'all must not have any teeth left, because I sure as heck don't. I'm practically gumming my food right now. God damn.
Of government the protection of civil liberties, the genuine concern for civil rights. There's a lot of talk about civil rights. The most basic civil right probably is freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and that is progressively denied. And as a result of the educational system, we find now that on American university campuses, about half the students who are polled say they don't really believe in complete free speech, depending on circumstances. So this has become quite.
Oh boy, we're just like I said. I guess like 2014, that time frame never ended. Where it's like my SJW universities. This is like the whole comedians aren't allowed on campuses and everything else like that. The thing is, I mean, oh man. The thing is that conservatives will be the most cowardice people, I think, in general, especially people like Dinesh D'Souza. They will be selling guns right next to, they will literally sell guns to fascists and will later claim, oh, well, I'm against fascism, you know? But it's the free market. It's a free market, bro. You know, this guy would sell guns to, like, you know, Adam Waffen or something like that, and they would pretend like nothing ever happened.
Successful to challenge the Constitution, to challenge American institutions, to
the Constitution. Oh, the whole thing is that people think that the Constitution does not speak for them. That's the whole idea of it. The thing is that Wicknats will use this too. That you know, that America was made for the white man. You know, America was created for him, for the European white man. You'll see NJP talking about, you know, this LARPy idea. NJP will never be viable, in my opinion. But it's like they'll say things like, you know, we will preserve indefinitely the European heritage or Western civilization. Get the fuck out of here. No, you won't.
Challenge American political practices, all of the inherited freedoms on which the United States was founded and then developed. All of these things are progressively being repudiated. This is the rise of proto-totalitarianism, the proto-totalitarian left. And it's kind of comical that, say, Republicans still refer to the Democratic left as the more liberal. No, they're the most anti-liberal. As far as the quotation you cited was concerned, this was originally Huey Long in 1935.
Oh, you're gonna shit on Huey Long now, huh? Hold on, go ahead.
Who said that Huey in fact said just before he was assassinated in 1935 that fascism would come to the United States, but we'll call it anti-fascism. This is the most classic.
Wait a minute, I thought that was Churchill that said that. Who the fuck? This is another. Okay, I'm going to explain another reason why people don't like politics. Nobody can decide what the fuck somebody said. He says Huey Long said that. Another guy will say this. It's just, this is why people are just like, no, I just want to grill, bro. I just want to go home and smoke weed and listen to, I don't know, whoever the fuck, you know, and listen to, I don't know, listen to WAP or something, you know, like some song like that, or listen to, would that really be good, smoking weed and listen to WAP? I don't know. Or go home and, you know, smoke weed and listen to Future or something like that, I guess. I don't know. Then ever get involved with this political bullshit, you know?
Quotation from Huey Long, and it's something to keep in mind.
You have written your whole career, Professor Payne, about civil war, and you've been talking about the rise of a totalitarian left. Doesn't it seem logical that this will?
He has hardly even mentioned the Spanish Civil War. He's hardly mentioned it. He's called it the Spanish Fascist Party. It's like, no, it was called the Phalangist Party, number one. And it was rooted in syndicalism. And then, of course, when Franco took over, he had to play all the different sides and ultimately made it a more monarchist sort of party, in a way. He kept the power of the king. He kept the Catholic Church around and all that business, you know? Like I say, I know that, you know, fascists and, you know, and, you know, National Socialists and all that, they argue about this silly bullshit, you know, but, you know, yeah, Franco did what he had to do to keep the system going. That's not a defense of him. That's just me saying what it is.
It must breed a certain reaction from the right. And the question I'm asking is, if you look at the example of Spain, do we see any parallels between the conditions in Spain that produced civil war in the 1930s and the situation facing America today? Talk a little bit about the...
Okay, let's stop right here just for a moment here. So he talks about the comparisons between Spain in the 1930s and the U.S. in 2021. Let me tell you why that's bad on numerous levels. Spain in the 1930s, arguably, and I'm trying to do this from an objective standpoint, not from any particular standpoint, Spain was still a rural, was more of an agricultural country. It was backwards in many ways. This is why, people went so hard on Catholicism, for example. People were still raised in the Catholic Church, and it was much more of a stricter society, right? Now, it was an empire, but the Spanish Empire, of course, had really died a long time ago. It was only a few spots, like, for example, Morocco, this and that. Morocco's, well, you know what? I'll just take the L on that. Let's just say North African Empire. We'll just say that. Let's continue on. But to say, you know what? Let me say this. To say that, Spain can be compared to the U.S. is kind of cringe. The thing is that you have the CNT FAI. You have, like I say, I don't think that you can completely, you had separatist movements, such as the Basque and everything else like that. But let's hear these comparisons. Let's go ahead and hear that, and then I can spurg out some more.
Dividedness of America and whether or not you might see a pull to the extremes. We already see hints of that in media and places like that. But what about the risk of all-out civil strife?
Well, first of all, the differences rather than similarities. Spain was a very fragmented country, so that even under the government of the left initially in Spain, there was not a strong central state. Whereas at the present time in the United States, the society is very divided. But on the other hand, when people sometimes talk about civil war, I raise the question, who is going to conduct civil war? The left in the United States has emphasized and is developing a kind of Leviathan state, a stronger and stronger central state against which direct organized resistance might soon become impossible.
Oh my goodness. A Leviathan state. Oh boy. Go ahead, Grandpa.
Under those conditions, you can't have a civil war, because to have genuine civil war, you have to have enough strength to rebel against the existing system. Whereas we're headed toward a circumstance in the United States in which the only alternative is simply going to become the Benedict option, individual withdrawal into privatism. And the individual withdrawal into privatism at first will be welcomed, in fact, by the left, because that will take people out of the direct political sphere. I don't think we have the circumstances in the United States which would make actual civil war possible. This is not 1861. This is not very fragmented Spain in 1936. It's highly divided, but division and fragmentation of power are two different things. And we don't have in the United States fragmentation of power. Power is not fragmented. The society is profoundly divided. But these are two different circumstances.
Is part of what you're saying, for example, and this actually may be the motive for why the left, right after the election, mobilized this massive apparatus of fences and military presence in DC and so on.
Oh my goodness. Are you serious? Are you serious? You're going to say that the left instituted... He's serious. He's going to say that the left instituted the fences and the concertina wire at the Capitol. Are you serious? Not because of the January 6th incident, and like I say, I've been back and forth on that issue, but come on. Are you serious? You're going to say that the left locked down? This is once again, I'm going to add this to why people fucking hate politics. Because you have retarded people like this who get your head so twisted around to actually think that the left will simultaneously be burning businesses in Portland, but then will also somehow support, because they support the central state, that they will protect the Capitol? What? What is he even saying?
As a way of saying, hey, listen, we are in charge. We have the government. We have the guns. Don't you dare think of doing anything because we affirm. Wasn't that kind of the message? It seems the militarization of D.C. as a way of telling the American people back off.
Absolutely. That was the message. And we made very firm and loud and clear.
We'll be back with Professor Payne for...
Oh my goodness. And this is typical of conservatives as well. I'll give them this, is that they're good at shilling themselves and they're good at making their money, but holy shit. Their ideas are such dog shit.
Side of the aisle is a Francoite or a fascist. So some of the same polarization we Council of Memory. And this Council of Memory becomes a kind of adjudication force that tells you how to think about events in Spanish history, and specifically the Spanish Civil War. Everybody who is on the left side or the Republican side of that conflict is treated as a victim and a champion of democracy. Everybody who is on the right side of the aisle is a Francoite or a fascist. So some of the same polarization we see in America, not to mention the promiscuous abuse of the term fascism, it's all here in your article. It seems to be all happening in Spain. Can you tell us a little bit about what this project is about in Spain? And then I'd like to ask you whether we might see something like this in America.
The politicization of memory became important in Spain, particularly from about the turn of the century. A motivation here was that by the end of the 20th century, the old propagandistic and motivational factors of the left, political, economic, socialism, had lost their strength. And the left had to find other means of support and emphasized much more than before the importance of the cultural revolution and of psychology and of feeling and of attitudes. And here, the approach to history was very significant. In Spain, the revival of...
You know what part of the problem is, too? I'm just going to go ahead and interrupt. Is that Caleb Maupin would probably agree to a point, for example, with the synthetic left and the creation of the synthetic left compared to the real left, as he would say, right? And I know, I know that people are saying, why do you say right when you say, but the the selling out of the left wing to this sort of synthetic belief of, well, if we just have civil rights, then everything's going to be okay. I guess Caleb Maupin is going to write a book on BreadTube. That was, oh my goodness. I saw that. I was like, oh my gosh, you boomer. Go ahead. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, when this professor is saying, and I decided not to immediately say anything about this whole stuff about privatization, this and that, but I do think that balkanization, will become an issue in time still, because there are going to be states that are going to be tired of other states' bullshit. And I think it's going to come up more and more. And I think there is going to be a push for a constitutional meeting. I can't think of the word offhand, but, I do think that issue will come up. So I don't agree with this professor, but let's go ahead and continue.
Memories of the Civil War. not because they were concerned about the history of the Civil War, they're opposed to history, but rather the manipulation of what they called memory. Memory, of course, being totally subjective and very fallible, even in the most well-meaning individuals. This is to use history in a very biased, very selective way to enforce political conformity in the present. That is, the purpose of memory, the politics of memory, is not history in the past, it is the present and the current state of politics and the current instrumentation of political power. And that's what the politics of memory is about in Spain.
So in this politics of memory, the authoritarianism is solely on the Franco side, and the Franco faction are the people who massacre people. But on the other side, you only have Democrats and victims. And you point out in this article that
Democrats and victims. Oh my goodness! Talk about it's so the veneer is so thin, isn't it? Where they were trying to make a difference. He uses these ideas and manipulates them very, very shoddily. He does a very shit job. Where he said earlier on in this, he said that, well, yeah, there's a difference between the European right versus the American right. There's huge differences there. And now he's just openly saying, well, actually, they're Democrats in his eyes. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. Oh. So it's okay. So what goes on in the European right versus the American right, two totally different things. But apparently, the European left and the American left apparently are the same thing. Is that what he's trying to say? Okay, go ahead.
Wasn't the reality on the ground at all. In fact, there were lots of people on the left side who were fighting against Franco, who are by no means Democrats. They were by no means unwilling to massacre people, and there were plenty of atrocities on both sides of the Spanish Civil War.
Absolutely. The original victimizers were the left, who began the revolutionary process, began the first Republican insurrection in 1930 with 3 summary executions when they started out in their very first hours and sustained the revolutionary process all the way through. During the Civil War, the revolutionaries executed 55,000 people, essentially in cold blood, which was approximately the same number of people as those killed by the other side.
Okay, hold on. Ooh, hold on there. So he's comparing the Red Terror and the White Terror. The thing is that the Red Terror included the destruction of Catholic churches, the digging up of nuns, and of killing people, as he said. But the thing is, though, that the White Terror killed more people. Let's be honest. Once again, I want to show. I'm trying to be as objective as I can be, and trying not to show, any sort of bias on either side. The thing is that the White Terror, even historians like Anthony Beaver will say, they killed more people. All right, that's the fact of the matter. But the thing is, though, is that the White Terror was more effective than the Red Terror. The Red Terror, they just, killed people willy-nilly, and they just upset, the traditionalists and upset the various, right-wing groups so that they all aligned under the phalangists to create a bulwark against the Trotskyists, the CNT, FAI, the anarchists, and the Marxist-Leninists, It was a bulwark to say, no, we're going to get rid of communism. Doesn't matter what they consider themselves to be, we're going to get rid of them. That's the whole thing of it, I don't know, but let's continue.
Revolutionaries were victimizers as much or more than they were victims. But
now, Grandpa, let's make sure here. I want to make sure here, Grandpa. Now, you were part of Iberian Wheel. Okay? So the thing is, Grandpa, Professor Payne, Dr. Payne, you were a part of this group. You were, his books were published by, in Spanish. Published in Spanish by a company set up by Spanish Republican exiles in Paris. Yeah. He has been referred to by some historians as a revisionist due to his views. One of his more famous books, The Spanish Civil War, which analyzed Joseph Stalin and Soviet government's intervention in Spain. He also wrote The Franco Regime, The Spanish Civil War, and A History of Fascism. Yeah, he sounds a bit like an opportunist and a grifter to me. You know. Let's continue.
Of course, all of this is totally distorted in the politics of so-called memory, which no one remembers, of course. Those people are all dead in Spain. What they mean is the politicized approach to history.
And isn't exactly the same thing happening right now in America, Professor Payne, in the sense that we don't have a national organization of collective memory, but for example, in San Francisco, the school board makes a decision. We don't want to have Ben Franklin's name on a school and no more Abraham Lincoln. And I think even Robert Louis Stevenson, the poet, got dethroned because of one line in a poem.
It just shows how fragmented and schizophrenic people are. So he pushed so hard to compare fascists to leftism in some way and to say that they all support central power. But then he goes so back. Oh man. How can people listen to this guy? I mean, oh my goodness. I'm getting a headache just thinking about this guy. Trying to promote these ideas and they're so schizophrenic. It's hard to even argue with people like this.
Where he misused or mispronounced the word Japanese and called it Japanese, and they were like, that's racist, he's got to go. So don't you see right now in America the similar political weaponization?
No, absolutely not.
Of history, and it's being done very consciously. You say this is not a project of ignorance. The people who know this know what they're doing. They're not ignorant, they're just excessively partisan.
No.
That is correct.
Okay. I'm going to have to show this. This is, okay. Yep. Oh, wow. How cringe can you get? Holy shit. Okay. Spanish flag. Phalangist flag. The other Catholic group flag. I can't think of it. You know, let me look it up. Hold on. I'm sorry. My mind is gone, folks. Absolute LARP. Oh, that's funny. But yeah, the Carlist. Oh man, I'm sorry, bothered the hell out of me. Okay.
The process in Spain is not really a Spanish invention. It's simply the most extreme individual expression of what is a very general tendency throughout the Western world. This is a cultural revolution developed by the politics, above all in the Western world, and is also active in the United States. It has not gone, in some ways it's gone farther in the United States, in other ways not quite as far. The idea is to stigmatize entire groups of people simply because of their basic identity. That's the essence of identity politics. Certain identities are victimizers. Certain other identities are victims. The facts of history, the facts of society make no difference. Everything is distorted, politicized, and redefined simply as victimizers and victims by what are termed racial or identity categories.
So in other words, even if you're, let's just say, a white guy in Pennsylvania, and you have a direct lineage to a guy who fought on the Union side of the Civil War and died on the battlefield of Gettysburg.
Nobody cares. Okay. All right, we're done with this shit. Okay.
Or if you're a member of the stigmatized race, there is no distinction to be made.
Oh, please. Are we going like minorly Wignatish? Like, we must secure the existence of white people type of shit?
the fact that slavery was ended by white men and not by any other category of men is irrelevant to the argument of the contemporary left.
Oh, man. Oh, boy. Grandpa, come on.
Because their concern is to stigmatize white men, and therefore the facts and realities of history are completely irrelevant.
Professor Payne, thank you for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Bye.
Get out. Bye. Poor Grandpa. All right. Well, that was a steaming pile of crap. And that was 2 hours long worth of crap. I'm going to edit the hell out of this, but I will break this up in at least maybe 2 or 3 bits. So hopefully y'all enjoy that. See you later and goodbye. And let me go ahead and find an outro that y'all will like. Let's see what we got here. We'll go ahead and use, let's go ahead and use this as the outro. Why not?